Aloha. Welcome to the Live Ukulele podcast. My name is Brad Bordessa. Thank you for tuning in. In this episode, I sit down with Brad Donaldson from the island of Kauai. He is an ukulele luthier and ukulele builder of almost 40 years of experience. Started out as a mandolin maker in Seattle and has since become entangled with the ukulele scene and now spends his time on Kauai. So if you're in the market for a handmade instrument or just are generally curious about how ukuleles are built, what makes them tick, then I think Brad can help shed some light on the mystery and also perpetuate some of the mysteries that surround the craft of ukulele lutherie. This podcast is supported by readers of liveukulele.com. So if you haven't already seen it, please go check it out. There are lots of resources and lessons available for free, and also some of my premium ebooks that dive into the depths of learning how to play the ukulele from a concept standpoint and how to adapt everything to your current skill level and learn to play from maybe more of a Zen place. Even though that's not my thing, ukulele Zen. That's the other guy, that's Stu Fuchs, not Brad. Anyways, I'm really excited to share this episode with you. I had a great time talking to Brad. He's a delightful guest. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Well, why don't you give us a little bit of a background of how you got us started building ukuleles?
Okay, well, that goes back quite a ways. I've always enjoyed building things. I mean, when I was in the third grade, I just would love to go to the library and find a book that would teach me how to make barometers out of orange juice cans and that sort of stuff. So anyway, with that background, as a young man, I was a custom knife maker when I started out. Taught myself how to hand forge pattern welded steel by reading books. And did that. So on a trip to Hawaii, I discovered koa. And you could use koa to make display boxes. Oh. On a subsequent trip to Hawaii, I'm reading the magazine on board the plane that they use koa to make ukuleles. Well, as a kid growing up, my father had a Martin tenor ukulele that he taught me how to play. And damn George Harrison, the Beatle. I was a teenager in the mid-'60s, and the Beatles were big, but I was running around with this tenor Martin playing it, and everyone thought I was a geek. And Harrison wouldn't tell the world that he loved ukuleles for 20 years after that. But anyway, as I got older and got married and grew up, when I discovered that they made ukuleles out of koa, I said, I don't have the Martin anymore. I want a ukulele. So I read a little bit, did a little research, and built myself 3 ukuleles out of koa. And they were playable, not much, overbuilt like most beginning instruments and stuff like this. But anyway, my wife then declared she wanted a mandolin. And this was the early 80s, and back then you had 2 choices of mandolins. You either, bought a Gibson for $3,000 or something from the Far East that was questionably playable. So I discovered Roger Simonoff's book on how to build a bluegrass mandolin and proceeded to find the parts from various music stores in Seattle and build her one. Well, it wasn't much of an instrument, but as it happened, we went to a guitar store that had just opened in a suburb of Seattle called the Guitar Emporium in Ballard. And she declared to the owner of the store that I'd made her a mandolin. And he said, well, why don't you bring it in? I'd like to have a look at it. So I took it in a week later, and he said, well, it's a little crude, but if you want to clean it up a little bit, I'll hang them on the wall for you. And with that invitation in mind, I built one and put it in the store, and 3 weeks later and $1,300, I got into building mandolins.
Wow.
It was a very lucky break in terms of people that aspired to luthiery, because what happened was this was a high-end guitar store. Carried guitars from $1,500 to $5,000, and this was back again in the early 80s. So what I didn't realize at the time is by having my instrument in that store, I had instant credibility, and it took off. Plus, the marvelous thing about it is Rob the owner was a beautiful source of information, and he just he took me by the hand. The hardest lesson I had to learn is that plagiarism in building musical instruments is encouraged. He told me to make a Gibson F5 mandolin for people. And the first one I made, I couldn't copy it directly. That was against everything I stood for, kind of stuff. So I changed some details, and I took it into, and he said, no, don't do that. Make a Gibson F5 copy. People don't care that it's not a Gibson. They just want an F5. And that was an important lesson. But he taught me a number of things. He was the sole importer at that time for John Larrivee guitars. And he took me up to the Larrivee factory a number of trips. I met John Larrivee in person, who was just marvelous. And he taught me an awful lot. So it was a great experience. But anyway, that was the beginnings.
Wow. And so you've since relocated-ish to Kauai.
Yeah.
And are you building just ukuleles these days?
Pretty much. Again, what took off is for about the first half of my career, I built primarily mandolins because that's what sell. And I retired. My real job, that was the other thing about my luthiery career, is I'm a part-time builder. Mm-hmm. The pressure was never, it started out, first of all, to acquire tools. That I could go, I was selling enough of mandolins that I could go to my wife and say, dear, I need to spend $1,000 on a bandsaw. Can we afford that? and it was, okay, no worries, because I'd bring enough money. So it started out kind of on that, and then grew. But about, I retired in 2005 from my career. And about that time, I started hearing rumblings ukuleles were making a comeback. And Rob at the Guitar Emporium didn't seem to verify that. He didn't have a lot of interest in verifications. But as I retired in 2005, my agency kept on calling me back to work. And I ran into a couple other coworkers back then who had heard I made instruments, and they wanted ukuleles. So actually, I had a couple bodies that I had started years ago, and I finished them up and got into ukulele and building them. And then shortly thereafter that, it had taken off again, and I got an ukulele underground, and it's been pretty much ukulele since then.
Nice. Seems like a good place to be. But like you say, ukulele underground, that's where we've crossed paths briefly in the past. I hear your name there, but more recently you contacted me to talk about and buy a vintage kumelai, right, that I was trying to pass on to somebody who could appreciate it instead of having it sit under my bed. And it got to you. I assume you've had a chance to look at it at least a little bit so far.
Oh, I've it's here, move just a little bit. You can't see it on the pad, but there it is. It is all set up and ready to go, and I love it. It's I'm really glad we got together, because it's a neat little instrument, and I've subsequently learned a lot more about the kumele instruments since then. I was a little puzzled at first when I got it, because a couple of the things I wasn't sure about. I didn't know any of its history or anything. And so the first thing that I want to do as a luthier is to find out how authentic it is and whether anything's been changed. And it was a little bit the finish on the thing ostensibly should be shellac.
Okay.
Should be kind of a French polish. So they didn't really French polish. They put shellac on a thing. It should be that. But what was on there seems to be impervious to alcohol. I can put alcohol on there and it should get sticky or something, but it seemed to be, and I know you thought the neck was mahogany because it was so dark, but no, I basically what I did, I took most of the finish off except for the top of the fretboard and the peg head itself because I didn't want to damage the decal at all. But as near as I can tell, it is perfectly authentic. Nothing's been modified. The tuners, which I wasn't sure about, are Champion tuners that are still being made by Grover. But as near as I can figure out, my guess is it was made in late 20s to early 30s.
Wow.
Because in subsequent research, I did find out that they did change some details right at the end and how they made things, different bracing and stuff like this. But it's got even factors like what they did was they with pencils wrote on the inside surface of the top and back. This one says 44B on the back and 44 something. I assume it's a T on the top to match the things. All this is things. It doesn't have a label, but that's not surprising that thing came off. But everything else is perfectly Kumele as near as I can tell. The other thing that makes it kind of special is Kumeles have a reputation, and I've just seen a couple of being paper thin in their construction. They didn't waste any wood. They slice it thin, and that's why they've got the sound they do, the ones that have survived. This one actually was built pretty stout. It's over, as far as I can measure, it's about 70 thousandths thick on the top and measuring it, and that's fairly stout because most of them I think would be about 55 to 60 thousandths and stuff. So anyway, probably helped that it lasted so long as it was a little stout. As far as the rebuild quick, it was good that it came to me because it was structurally compromised.
Yeah, no doubt.
Not only crack, but typically that crack, and it's hard to say with a chicken in the egg, is the two braces on the sound hole had come loose at one point, and that's what led to that depression and stuff like that. So the first thing I did was jack up those braces and re-glue them to restore that. Then in repairing the crack, I added basically a cleat brace underneath on that and pulled it up tight and stuff like this to reinforce things. After that, the type of I don't restore instruments. I've read a couple things per se of guys that have handled Kumeles that take a hot palette knife and carefully take off the back and restore everything on hot hide glue and stuff like this. I'm not a big fan of hot hide glue. I like tight bond. And for the kind of stuff I do, it's minimalist. It's super glued into things and squeezed together because it holds it really, really good. But, it's a quick and dirty repair. So hopefully it's good for another 80 years.
Wow. So you didn't end up taking it apart?
No, I didn't. The problem with that is getting them back together again. Because when you're building, you've got overlap from tops and things, and you sand them and things. When you take a finished instrument, if something shifts, you'll never. I mean, the way you would do it typically would take a hot palette knife, and with hot glue, you get it apart, and you pop off the back, and so you could get the things. But getting that thing to line up again, if anything shifts, when you re-glue the braces or anything like that, you've got a can of worms on your hands. So I will tell you that restoring old instruments is an order of magnitude more difficult than building them.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
Oh, no, it's top-notch repair people are amazing in my group because, it's... as a luthier, you always get somewhat of a feel for doing that stuff because you have to fix your own mistakes. So you get involved in repair work in a sense doing that. But you also discover that boy, it's a hell of a lot easier not to make the mistakes in the first place.
Wow. So having had a chance to look at it, did you have any takeaways from the build style? Because I know that's why you wanted to get hold of it, was to see if you could learn something from how they built.
Yeah, again, I did. As I say, I mentioned it was a little stouter than I imagined. The other takeaway with it is, again, these were instruments that were made cheaply for tourists, and you find that out when you get. I mean, those braces are just rectangular hunks. There's no sanding. They weren't finished sanding. There's nothing extra that's done. There's not a bridge patch in the thing. The linings are just kind of rectangular. I mean, they slapped them together expeditiously to make money. So that was, that was interesting that how they are made. But I love it because it's a real piece of history in the early days of that. And again, it's a marvelous sounding instrument.
So having seen that instrument that's going on 100 years old and building ukuleles today, do you feel like the craft has improved the entire way, or have there been places along the way where the craft in general has, like, I don't know, maybe lost an art or kind of devolved in certain ways?
That's hard to say. Some years ago, just like this, I got a bug still having my father's old Martin now tenor. On eBay, I saw was advertised at the time as a 1950s Martin soprano O-style ukulele. Finish was all cracked on the things. It was missing a tuner and stuff like this. And I went and got it. Paid $400 for it. We come to an agreement, and he shipped it to me. And the seller didn't know what he'd had, because the first thing I saw when I got it is, oh my God, this thing has got bar frets on it instead of T frets, which supposedly Martin quit using in 1934. Now, I found out later from the Martin book that it's possible that it could have been into the 40s, but because it has metal tuners or whatever kind of stuff and everything. But anyway, long story short, when I build a ukulele that sounds as good as that Martin, I probably quit, because it just, and I don't really know why, what there is. There's a possibility, because I do think it was made in the 30s. It's a possibility that it was made out of Cuban mahogany rather than Honduran mahogany, which may have made a difference. It's not particularly, it's a light instrument, but it's not overly light or lightly constructed. There was no fretwear whatsoever on it. And, but there's no deformation on the top at all. And it's, I don't know. But anyway, back to your question, In some respects, there's a lot of things that were due that have improved the craft. But in other respects, the materials are inferior. We don't have the old growth that we used to have, the air-dried things and stuff like that. So, the bottom line is that particular Martin sounds as good as any ukulele I've ever heard, and the same thing. So, you improve in some respects, but in other respects, due to materials and stuff like this, we're kind of treading water.
If you're tired of using chords in a one-size-fits-all manner on the ukulele, then you might be interested in ukulele chord shapes. It's a complete guide to how to move almost 190 different chord shapes into all 12 keys. This eliminates the need for one-and-done chord boxes and also gives you a broader look at the ukulele fretboard. Andrew Katakis, owner of Hawaii Music Supply, says, Brad has created the best ukulele chord book I've seen to date. James Hill recommends it on Ukulele in the Classroom, and Grammy winner George Kahumoku Jr. calls it an outstanding instructional book. Ukulele chord shapes is a method for advanced beginning players and up to not only learn more complex harmonies, but also how the ukulele works. To see what others have to say and to learn more, visit liveukulele.com and click on Store. So, for you as a builder, it seems like the vintage instruments hold a special appeal to you. What is your lane as a builder? What do you kind of get a kick out of building?
I enjoy, the thing is, I encourage young builders, people that are getting into it. One of the things I tell them to avoid is do not try and reinvent the wheel. Because generally speaking, if they can think of it, it's been tried. People have used balsa for soundboard materials. I heard a violin that was entirely made out of balsa that was marvelous sounding and stuff like this. But I enjoy actually true innovation, which is very difficult to do. And again, what you do, you should have a good deal of experience to have some idea. For a young builder, I encourage them, take the Martin Style O and build them till you can't make them any better. Then, from there on, then start experimenting with your own ideas. I came up with this. This is a funny story. Years ago, getting into it, on Ukulele Underground, Amy Singer from Toronto had a post saying she wanted to know if there's an ukulele made for women. The gist of it was she had a large chest, and the standard domed ukulele did not set on the girls too good. It wiggled around. Mm-hmm. And people told her on the thing, well, get a strap, play sitting down and stuff like this. So I like a challenge like that. So in my mind, I'm going, what could I do that would make it more stable? I know there's no reason why a ukulele has to be made convex in the back. I designed what I called an Amy model that has a concave back. I told Amy I couldn't make it a D-cup size, but actually I could put quite a bit of deflection in the back. And so I made it, called my Amy model, sent it to her as a prototype, and she absolutely loved it. But the funny thing about the Amy model that I didn't think about in the hand, it turns out it's a hell of an idea, because me with my big gut and stuff like this, when I take an Amy model and you rest it again, just the edges of the back touch your body. The rest of the back is still free to vibrate.
Oh, wow.
And so I have sold a number to a lot of men, that go, wow, because, and it's one of the things in mandolins especially, because with archtop instruments, the back contributes every bit as much of the sound as the top does. They work in concert. So if you rest it against your body at all, a mandolin, you're killing a lot of the sound. And they construct these cages that go on the back, or the player learns to hold it away from his body and stuff so he doesn't do it. So, but that's kind of one of the innovations that I'm proud of. I very much enjoy this. There's a lot of work. Bracing gets a lot of attention in instrument building, but it is difficult to come up with bracing that is truly unique. Taylor Guitar with their V-style bracing is actually one of the latest new features. It actually has a great deal of promise in the thing, and I'm doing an experiment with that. Some of the other innovations I'm working on is in the past I've done some ukuleles that had a top out of two different woods. I don't know if you remember, Brad, but years ago there was Victor Jones from Kentucky started this. It was called the Fun Build. That we had a bunch of luthiers from around the world supply various parts for a ukulele based on a standard Martin O soprano. And the idea was to get wild and crazy and did this. Well, I built the top. The top was made out of Oregon myrtle and koa, cut in a diagonal seam instead of straight up and down. And the guys took it for there. I had the privilege of assembling the instrument and finish the build on the stuff. And it was really cool. But recently, again, I've done that. I mean, I couldn't tell any difference between the combination between the koa and myrtle were perfectly compatible. I couldn't tell that any difference between a solid myrtle top or a solid koa top in the sound. But recently, I've started using a combination of woods. I'll use koa and spruce with a spruce wedge in the middle, and then a modify. I call it an A bracing that goes underneath the seams of the koa and spruce, and it's working out to be kind of a neat kind of idea. I've sold a couple to people and they've been impressed, because the big difference, you have a discussion with luthiers all the time, how much does the wood is made out of affect the sound? And I find when it comes to hardwoods, your mahoganies, your koa, your myrtle and stuff like this, there may be subtle differences in how they sound, but they're really subtle. The builder is far more important. But when you go into softwoods like spruce and cedar, redwood for the tops, there's a definite difference then. I mean, the softwoods are definitely brighter sounding, punchier and brighter. They don't have the warmth or the overtones that the hardwoods tend to have, but there's a noticeable difference. So what I found in using a combination of spruce and koa, that I am getting some of the punch from the spruce, but with the warmer overtones of the koa and kind of stuff. So it's fun to experiment with stuff like that.
So just to clarify, is that a spruce and koa top, or what is the configuration?
Again, yes, it's two book match pieces of koa on the sides, and then there's, if you imagine the letter A, it's a wedge of spruce in the center. So as you go across the top, it's koa, spruce in the center, and then koa again on the thing.
Wow.
So it's a three-piece top, like Martin used to do a three-piece back and stuff like this, but different woods, hardwood and softwood.
And I imagine the look is very striking.
The look is. When I first did it, this is some of the crazier stuff that you get into. A question was asked on Ukulele Underground once: why does the grain always run vertically in the top? Why couldn't you build with it going across? And it actually kind of, to get wild and crazy and stuff like this. So the first one I did, the spruce in the top actually runs horizontally. The koa is vertically and stuff like this. And it's an interesting thing, because it opens up that spruce from a longitudinal, flexibility. I mean, it's really flexible in there. Of course, the bracings run alongside it, so you get involved with tuning that. But I since then have gone to, well, that's a little too esoteric. I don't think I was gaining anything, and now I just leave the spruce vertical. But it's an interesting experiment. We'll see how it. One of the things when you do stuff like this is you never know what the longevity of an instrument is going to be like that. Whether problems occur down the road because you're using different woods and different expansion, contractions, and stuff like that. And one of the things about it that is different in the bracing too is I did away with the transverse bracing around the sound hole. I've got two small pieces, two short braces right above and below the sound hole, but they don't go across the whole body. And I like that idea because it opens up the entire top. Because otherwise, with the transverse braces that you normally find on either side of the sound hole, it separates the upper bout from the lower bout, and I think it takes a lot of the lower or the upper bout out of the equation. So anyway, who knows? All that's speculative.
Well, it's just fascinating to hear you kind of break down your process of experimenting and how you've worked through these things. And I mean, I've spent a lot of time over the years with Chuck Moore, and I play one of his instruments, but we've been good friends for a lot longer than that. And just seeing him work, I get the impression that building it's very esoteric. And you mentioned that the builder is the key and not so much the materials. Do you feel like nitpicking the little tiny things out of an instrument are that important, or is it the greater whole that the builder can bring
The nitpicking details are vital. I mean, that's what differentiates a quality instrument from, a rather ordinary one. It's all in the details. The whole building process. This was an interesting thing. Years ago when I was building mandolins, I had an interesting experience. It happened a couple years in a row where I had customers sit around in a circle in the quiet room to listen to instruments, playing my mandolins, and they would hand them off in a circle. And what blew me away was how similar those mandolins all sounded. I mean, there was a very, very distinctive sound. And what really surprised me is I had changed a lot of building in details. X-bracing to parallel bracing and a lot of stuff that were changing that didn't, overall didn't mean anything. And one of the things that helped me immensely is, again, I'm a Seattle native, born and raised in Seattle, and my early career was in Seattle. Well, the Guild of American Luthiers is located in Tacoma, Washington, 30 miles south of Seattle. Every 2 or 3 years, they have an annual convention. And seeing as how it's 30 miles away, I could go to that every time they had one. And it is the most amazing experience anyone can have. Because I could have and have had private conversations with Roger Simonoff, who is the world's leading expert on mandolins. And told him, I said, geez, Roger, what is this? I mean, because I know I changed the details. And he says, no, there's enough similarities in how you build that creates that overall sound. And so it's definitely the builder, and it is those myriad of little tiny details that that do shape it.
Wow, so you're saying it's more like the fingerprint of the builder than, say, maybe the specs?
Yes, because as I say, this is what I changed the specs on those. The funny thing, I know on Ukulele Underground, I'll throw this little tidbit in there that there's all many times a lively discussion on whether instruments open up as they age and stuff like this. Well, there is no doubt whatsoever in my mind, because I build instruments back in the mandolin days. I built them in batches, and I would string up 4 or 5 mandolins at a time. And out of a batch of that, you would have 2 that were relatively quiet, 2 that kind of as you expect, and 1 that just went boom. Big differences. Well, what I learned from that circle is that the quiet ones would open up in a number of months and improve greatly. The middle ones would improve slightly, and the ones that went boom didn't get much better at all. But there is no doubt in my mind that this is, I don't have an explanation necessarily for it or whatever, but this is, I mean, it also was, verified when the fact is the quiet instruments would typically sit in Rob's shop for 3 or 4 months, open up, and then get sold. The one that went boom would be sold within a week. But again, when the people sat around, I couldn't tell which was which in these things. So it's just kind of one of those unknown mysteries.
That is so fascinating.
Well, the fascinating thing about lutherie is it is not terribly difficult for someone to make an instrument. A competent woodworker with just a modicum of skills is perfectly capable of building a perfectly acceptable instrument. But to master the craft of lutherie can take a lifetime. We still do not know, and this surprises people, there is still a great debate in what the sides and back contribute to the overall sound of an ukulele or a guitar. It's not known. You know, and what you have is today, interesting in the modern builders, you have two camps. You have people. Chuck Moore likes to build his sides and back fairly thick to reflect the sound. Okay. I, on the other hand, like to build them lightly so they vibrate. Now, which one is it? Well, in my opinion, there's probably both going on. You have some reflection of the sound and you have some vibration of the sound. What's the best approach? I have no idea. But that's the fascinating thing about it is, again, the things that we don't know far exceed. I mean, the Stradivarius violin, most studied instrument in the world, and there's still no one knows what makes them tick. I mean, I will say this, there are modern builders that meet or exceed the Stradivarius violin, that they do better. It is no longer necessarily the gold standard that it was, but they still don't necessarily understand, what is special about a Stradivarius violin. And what do you think you're more better in terms of, I've never had the experience to play one, but I understand they're marvelous.
I mean, I love mine. It's perfect for what I do. I've learned to play to it, so it sounds the best that I can make it sound. But I'm kind of in the camp of his job and your job is to build the instruments, and my job is to play it and not kind of question what could be better about it so much. It's like, this is really good. I really like it. I'm just gonna play it and get the best out of it. So I love it. It's great. It's got, well, the funny thing about that is when I first sat down to play it, when he first handed it to me in the shop, it's like, here it is, it's done. Uh-huh. It was so bright because he built it with the super tight grained spruce top, one piece with koa back and sides, and it was super bright. I was like almost disappointed in how bright it was. But I took it home and played it for a couple months, and over the years it's gotten just warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer, and now it's just like any other instrument. I had to.
Okay, well, you understand then, especially with spruce. Spruce ages over time. It is very bright at first, and again, one of the reasons the classical guitarist went to cedar tops is that for a concert classical guitar player, if he has a spruce top guitar, it needs to be at least 10 years old before he takes it to a concert. Wow. It needs to age that much. A cedar top matures in a year. And so that's why you went to a lot of, you're seeing in classical guitar cedar and stuff like that, because, spruce takes a while to come into its own, but it does.
So that those 10 years, do you believe those are 10 years of just being or 10 years of being played? I know people do like the tone bright thing or whatever, where they stick it on the bridge and let it.
I have no verification of that. I've had lots of discussions in the store. I know Rob Eagle and everything. He played music in his store all the time to vibrate the instruments. He believed, and I know a lot of very good guitar players that believe that if you're someone with a strong attack and you play someone's guitar who has a lighter attack, it takes, a good 2 hours more of their playing again to get that guitar back to where it'll respond to their playing. I can't verify that. I'm not that good of a player myself. And surprisingly enough, again, the best instrument I have is my old Martin. There was no sign that it had ever been played at all. I say it doesn't take much playing to put a very slight groove in a fret. Right. If it's been fretted at all, you see something, and there's not a sign of anything in an old Martin. So I doubt very much it was played, but it still sounds marvelous. So the jury's out for me on that. I don't have an opinion one way or another.
This is wonderful. This is like exactly the kind of conversation that I love to have, is that so much and you're so accomplished, and yet you almost realize like every day how little you actually do know with the craft. And I feel the same way about music.
Well, yeah, music is that way. I wish I was a better player, but I can spend my time building instruments or spend it playing. So I chose the building side. But yeah, it's this is what fascinating the art is. Again, we don't know an awful lot, and you know, the coolest thing, what really drew me to luthiery, is people like Chuck Moore. The funny thing about the craft is the total, basic luthier is the Kuleana, of the responsibility to share your knowledge. If you learn something, when I first did the Amy model, I was told, patent it. And I said, no, I'm not patenting that. For one thing, it's almost impossible to do an idea like that. But no, that's to be shared with everyone. But I mean, I don't know Chuck as a person. I've interacted with him enough time. He's been marvelous to me. He sent me his ratio tuners that he got as a gift from Graph Tech, because he wasn't going to use them on his, and I understand why. But I love the thing, and I've got that on my original concert that I made from things. But it's just wonderful how sharing the luthiers are with their knowledge and how they cooperate. I mean, we've got a builders group on Kauai that Bob Gleason. You probably know Bob too. He's on your island. I love Bob, and we just have a ball. Again, we just on Friday had a Zoom meeting and stuff like this, and we're just the amount of sharing and of information and how to do things it's just a wonderful group of people.
That's great. I feel the same way about the Hawaiian musicians here, and it's a blessing to be part of a scene like that.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Well, this has been really great. Maybe one last question to send us off. I know we've got lots of players listening to the podcast. What are your top tips for somebody who's searching for a handmade instrument, and maybe like the interaction between the builder and the player? Because I know a lot of people get really hung up on specs and this and that and the other thing. And, what can you provide that you share with your customers?
Well, again, what you have to do is you need to establish some rapport with any builder you're working with, because it's a give and take process. My attitude when a customer's working with me is I try my best, number one, to make the process as much fun as I possibly can. I mean, that's the whole thing. If it's not fun, it's no good for either party. But also to impart as much knowledge about the process as I can. The more a player understands how an instrument is built, the easier my job is. So I take it just like I'm talking to you. I take the opportunity to educate people as much as I possibly can about the builder process and a few other things. One of the things you run into as a customer builder, and it happens now, is I want my name or initials on a fretboard. And I'm immediately in their face said, no, you don't. And I can say that. I said, I have got, my latest serial number was 439 on the ukulele. I just boxed up. And in close to 40 years of experience, I've had mandolins, I've had ukuleles that are heirlooms that will stay in a family forever, because I just know the people and stuff like this. But I've also had instruments that the people loved. I had a mandolin once that was one of those boomers that got sold right away, and the guy just was head and heels in love until it got sold. Now, he sold it so he could buy a John Monteleone mandolin, which is a $10,000 instrument. So I can't, excuse me, be too hurt about that. But again, what I've learned over the years is you may love a given instrument for a while, but, the vast majority of instruments are going to have several owners in their lifetimes. So things like putting your name on a fretboard isn't a real good idea. And other things. I just had a customer that I didn't find out until later. It was a 12-year-old boy, and he's a great player and a very nice kid, but he wanted his name on the fretboard, and we went around about it. But I said, okay, I'll do it. Not an issue, and did, and he's thrilled to death with it. But he's also a soprano, and he wanted it low G. And I went, not the best idea, I mean, I've done it. I've got sopranos that can play low G. I'll do what I can, but, it's generally speaking, that body resonance, a soprano, my body resonance on a soprano is somewhere around middle C. So for it to vibrate in that low G range is really tough. But he's a fingerstyle player, and he wants linear tuning, so I did it. Fortunately, loved it. But anyway, in working with luthier, you want to find someone that meshes with you and you can communicate readily with, and call them up, and talk to them. A lot of my customers feel sometimes that somehow when they email me or otherwise call me up on the phone that they're bothering me. That's, I don't have that feeling. I enjoy interacting with people and stuff like this. Like I say, the more we communicate, the easier it is for me. The one thing that I'll warn people about doing, because I get this now and then, when I get a customer that says, well, okay, I want this sound, it needs to be, warm but bright, and they start rolling off all these terms that mean something to them, not so much to me. And ultimately, what I have to tell people, have you heard one of my instruments? And if not, we need to get one in your hand somehow, because that's what it's going to sound like. And that's the best answer I can give. I cringed in today's marketplace. I love the Chinese. They made it possible for the ukulele scene the way it is by cranking out thousands and thousands of instruments. And when I was young, back in the day, getting a cheap instrument was shooting yourself in the foot because they were out of tune, impossible to play, and it wasn't. Now with CNC machines and the manufacturing techniques, $100 buy you a perfectly playable ukulele, and it's wonderful. But I still cringe, understand, is wood is not an engineered material. I tap it, I flex it, I smell it, taste the sawdust, all that's an intuitive process in building. And in doing that, that's what creates the sound. When you buy a factory-made instrument, even a Martin, if you don't play it, you have no idea what you're getting. Most of your Martin instruments are good, but not all of them. And some of them are real exceptional. So, in buying instruments, always better if you can play it first. Or if you're having a custom-made one, know what the luthier produces. And I'll end it there.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Brad. This has been just an absolute pleasure, and so nice to finally see you face to face and get to talk story.
Okay, cool.
If you want to find out more about Brad's ukuleles and see some of his progress shots and also some of his finished builds, you can check out donaldsonUkuleles.wordpress.com and go visit him on the web. The Live Ukulele podcast is published on the first and third Saturdays of the month. Please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Got some other good interviews coming up later in the season. Thanks again to Brad for coming on the show and sharing his expertise. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Take care of one another. Be well, stay safe, wear your mask, all that good stuff. And I'll see you down the road. Aloha.